This episode of Patriots from the Barrio is sponsored by the Paredes Family Trust. We thank you for your support. Hello everyone, I'm Dave Gutierrez, historian, writer, and the author of the book Patriots from the Barrio. And welcome to episode 2 of Patriots from the Barrio, the story of Lieutenant Oscar Perdomo, the last American ace in a day of World War II. Of the 1,000 of American fighter pilots who flew combat missions during World War II, nearly 1,300 would earn the highly coveted honor of being recognized as an ace. To become an ace, a pilot would have to have 5 enemy planes destroyed while in aerial combat during their career. Now, for every pilot that climbed into the cockpit of a fighter plane during World War II, their biggest goal was to be an ace and to have that coveted distinction of being an ace in combat. Now, only 68 American pilots would join another elite group of becoming an ace in a single day. Lieutenant Oscar Perdomo, a Mexican-American born in El Paso, Texas, and grew up in the historic Boyle Heights area of East LA, would overcome many obstacles to be a US Army officer and a P-47 pilot. Lieutenant Perdomo would become the last American ace in a day of World War II. On August 6, 1945, a B-29, nicknamed the Enola Gay and piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets, dropped the first atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. Just 3 days later, on August 9th, a second atomic bomb was dropped on the city of Nagasaki. 4 days would go by, and there were no signs that Japan was going to surrender, even after we dropped 2 atomic bombs. Allied forces in the Pacific continued to bomb Japanese targets in Japan and in other areas. On August 13th, 1945, Lieutenant Oscar Perdomo, piloting his P-47 Thunderbolt, and fighters of the 464th Fighter Squadron were flying escorts for B-29s on another mission over Seoul, South Korea, which the Japanese at that time, under Japanese rule, it was called Keiho. The American P-47s spotted over 50 enemy fighters, and a dogfight of the P-47s and Japanese aircraft ensued. During the firefight, Lieutenant Perdomo was credited for shooting down 4 Japanese Nakajima Oscar fighters and 1 Willow biplane, giving him a total of 5 enemy aircraft destroyed. In less than 24 hours, Japan surrendered, ending World War II and making Lieutenant Perdomo the last American ace in a day of World War II. We will dive into this historic mission with more detail in a little bit here, but I wanted to give you a little insight on the man that was Oscar Francis Perdomo. Oscar's parents were married in El Paso, Texas on July 18, 1918. His father, Francisco, was born in a suburb just outside of Mexico City. Oscar was born on June 14, 1919 in El Paso and would be the first of 6 children. By 1930, the family had relocated to Los Angeles, California, Oscar grew up in the Boyle Heights area of East LA and attended James Garfield High School, where he was on the track team. As a youngster, he was in a popular event of the times, and that was drag racing. I was told that Oscar was always going with his hair on fire with anything he did. The high-speed adrenaline of drag racing is something he gravitated towards. So Oscar graduates from Garfield High School in 1939. In April of 1942, Oscar and his girlfriend, Helen Doris Stewart, were married in Nevada. Always with this dream of his to fly one day, he joined the US Army right after being married, and by 1943 was an air cadet in the US Army Air Corp. He was sent to Thunderbird Field near Scottsdale, Arizona for primary flight school, where they were flying the PT-17 biplane. This is the same plane that all air cadets had to master in order to get past primary flight school. More than half of the class would wash out and didn't make it. Oscar made it through, and after mastering the biplane, he was sent back to California to Minter Field. There, they're flying the basic trainer aircraft, the Vultee BT-13 Valiant. After passing through at Minter Field, he goes back to Arizona, at Williams Field near Chandler, Arizona, where now he's flying the North American AT-6 Texan aircraft. Now, there, cadets are required to fly 70 hours. That included aerial gunnery, combat maneuvers, navigation, instrument flying, in order to get past this class. And on January 7th, 1944, Oscar graduates, earning his wings, and is commissioned a second lieutenant in the United States Army Air Corps. Oscar Perdomo is now an officer in the United States Army Air Corps. An incredible feat of the times to make it to the rank of an officer, to become an officer in the military. A lot of obstacles in their way, and here Oscar was doing what he dreamed of, again, with his hair on fire, wanted to fly, and he becomes a second lieutenant in the United States Army. He gets his wings and is assigned to fly P-47 Thunderbolt fighters. The Flying Jug, as it was nicknamed, a heavy fighter that really represented a flying milk jug, and that is what gave it its nickname as the Jug for the P-47 Thunderbolt. Oscar was assigned to the 464th Fighter Squadron as part of the 507th Fighter Group. The 464th Fighter Squadron was activated in October of 1944 and started initial training in Bruning, Nebraska, at what was Bruning Field in Bruning, Nebraska. They moved to Dalhart Airfield in North Texas in December of 1944. While at Dalhart Airfield, Oscar Perdomo meets up with the 464th Fighter Squadron. Oscar's wife would say that Oscar was a squeaky clean dresser and always looked sharp. He was dressed to the nines at all times. Many in the squadron quickly gave Oscar his nickname, and his nickname in the squadron was Zoot, for Zoot Suit. due to his real clean looking demeanor. He was always squeaky clean dresser, according to Doris. After training for months in their P-47s, the unit is finally given their orders to report to the Pacific Theater of War. In May of 1945, they arrive in the state of Washington and board a ship for the trek across to the Pacific. They arrive on June 24th on the island of Aishima, a small island near Okinawa. The famed American journalist Ernie Pyle was killed on Aishima by a Japanese sniper just a month before they arrived on the island to start their missions in their P-47 Thunderbolts. So now the 464th Fighter Squadron is ready for action. The 464th was one of 3 squadrons that made up the 507th Fighter Group. So there was the 463rd Fighter Squadron, and their tail markings had a triangle on the yellow tail of the aircraft. The 464th Fighter Squadron, which Oscar was part of, they had a diagonal line slashed across their yellow tail on the aircraft. And the 465th Fighter Squadron had no markings on the yellow tail. And that's how they identified, you could look at an aircraft and say, okay, we know what fighter squadron they are, and that was based on the markings of the tail. So the time came for Oscar to start thinking about a nickname for his P-47N Thunderbolt aircraft. And as most pilots did, they all nicknamed their plane, and they had markings on their plane to identify each of their aircraft, right? Just weeks after receiving his wings in January of 1944, Oscar's wife Doris gave birth to their first son, and they named him Kenneth Perdomo, Kenneth after Doris's father. So the baby Ken was named after his grandfather, his maternal grandfather. So Oscar's a new daddy, a new baby boy, and Oscar had this fascination with a Tommy gun, a Tommy submachine gun. Oscar instructed his crew chief to paint a baby boy holding a Tommy gun on his Thunderbolt aircraft, his P-47. The Tommy gun was often referred to as a meat grinder of a weapon, a real meat chopper. So Oscar named his aircraft Little Meaty's Meat Chopper. And his newborn son Ken was the inspiration for naming his P-47 Thunderbolt. Oscar's P-47 also had the number 146 as the identifying number of the aircraft, and its aircraft registration number was 44-88211. And with that registration number, you could always follow the history of the aircraft and, when it was manufactured and things like that. So Oscar's unit arrives June 24th, 1945. Their first mission of the entire fighter group, the 507th Fighter Group, was flown on July 1st, 1945. So from July 1st to the end of the war, really, the 464th Fighter Squadron flew 496 combat missions, or combat sorties, I should say. Nearly 3,000 flying hours. And some of these missions were bomber escorts, dive bombing enemy targets on the ground, and vessels. It was extremely dangerous work, and some of the pilots did not make it back to the base. Twice, Dumbo missions, and Dumbo missions were referred to as going out and recovering downed pilots. Twice, Dumbo missions in the 464th Fighter Squadron were launched to try to find downed pilots. Oscar flew in 9 of these missions before flying the mission to escort the B-29 bombers near Seoul, South Korea on August 13th. So on that historic day, on August 13th, 38 P-47s of the 507th Fighter Group were in the air on the mission when they run into 50 enemy planes. So you had nearly 90 aircraft over Seoul, South Korea, about to come together in a historic firefight. So let's keep in mind, 2 atomic bombs have already been dropped on Japan, and the war was still going on. First Lieutenant Dallas Yergain from Arkansas, his fighter was hit by flak and was on fire. He was last seen heading out to the sea, and he bailed out of his aircraft. So again, we're in this historic firefight now. 38 P-47s just ran into 50 enemy planes, and the firefight is on. As the fighters broke formation to engage the enemy, Oscar, flying as an element leader, found 3 enemy planes flying in a formation. He moved in on the tail fighter and fired his guns. The rounds from his Thunderbolt hit the front of the enemy aircraft and cockpit, setting the Japanese aircraft on fire and plunging towards the earth when it exploded while still in the air. Quickly, Oscar moved in on the second enemy fighter. He fired his guns at the enemy fighter until it burst into flames. The Japanese fighter rolled over and dived into the earth, exploding. Oscar has quickly downed 2 enemy planes, and now he's chasing the lead plane in this 3-man formation of aircraft. He's in a tight turn, and he fires his guns as the enemy plane is coming into his sights. Oscar fires his guns until the Japanese aircraft stalls at about 100 feet from the ground and crashes. In a matter of minutes, Oscar has downed 3 enemy planes, and now he's looking to regroup and find his friends when he spots 2 enemy aircraft. There are 2 Japanese Willow biplanes at about 800 feet in the air. The 2 enemy aircraft spot Oscar's Thunderbolt, and they start to scramble. Oscar quickly moves in on the closest biplane and starts firing at it. He continues to fire until the burning biplane crashes into the earth. Now, Oscar could not locate the second biplane that had scrambled away, so he climbs his P-47 up over the clouds. And just as he's breaking through the clouds, he finds himself with 3 more enemy aircraft. And he's in a very bad position, so he takes off. And they're chasing him. They're firing on him, and he's maneuvering very quickly so that he doesn't get shot down. He skillfully maneuvers his Thunderbolt P-47 as one of the fighters makes a right turn right into his sights. Oscar quickly fires a burst, setting the aircraft on fire, and the aircraft exploded in midair. Oscar has just downed aircraft number 5 during this firefight. Now he's looking to regroup with his squad when he sees 2 P-47s engaged with another Japanese fighter. Oscar's in a perfect position as he sees this all happening and dives right in a perfect angle, firing his guns. He keeps on the trigger and realizes he's run out of ammunition. He's been in a firefight. He downs 5 enemy planes, and he's in on the aircraft number 6, but he runs out of ammunition. The P-47 has 8 50 cal guns on it. You can see the massive firepower that this aircraft has, and he's expended all of his ammo. With no ammo, Oscar is now vulnerable and now has to evade this Japanese fighter, who is now closing in on him from behind. Lieutenant Harry Steinhauer, also from the Oscar's 464th Fighter Squadron, is flying his Thunderbolt number 133, and he comes to the rescue. As the Japanese fighter was set to fire on Lieutenant Perdomo, Oscar Perdomo, from behind, Steinhauer fires into the Japanese fighter and downs the enemy fighter that was about to fire on Oscar, who's out of ammunition. Lieutenant Steinhauer has shot down his second plane of the day on that mission as well. Lieutenant Dallas Yergain, who had his P-47 hit by enemy flak and bailed out, was returned to the United States after Japan surrendered. So he actually survived that mission. The squadron, after this historic firefight, the squadron made the 1,500-mile flight back to the base. Now, what I just described is listed on Lieutenant Oscar Perdomo's Distinguished Service Cross citation. Oscar is awarded the second highest medal for military service. Not only does he become the last American ace in a day of World War II, Lieutenant Oscar Perdomo became the only ace in the entire 507th Fighter Group during the war. So Lieutenant Oscar Perdomo downs 5 enemy planes. All of the documentation of this historic firefight indicates that Oscar has downed 4 Japanese Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar fighters and 1 Willow biplane. After they reviewed the camera from Oscar's P-47, many believe that they were not Japanese Nakajima Ki-43 Oscars, but in fact that they were the Japanese Nakajima Ki-84 Franks. And if it was the Ki-84 Franks, those aircraft actually have a higher maneuverability. And to me, that makes Oscar's 5 down planes even more impressive. But there is a lot of discussion among historians on whether or not they were Oscars or Franks. To me, Lieutenant Oscar Perdomo downed 5 enemy planes. The next day, Japan surrenders. The Japanese negotiators arrived in Aishima on the island that the 464th Fighter Group was based at. During his time in World War II, Oscar took several photos to document his World War II service. And many of these photos were sent to me by his son, Ken. And also, a lot of these photos are online. And you could find them through the San Diego Air and Space Museum's public post on Flickr. So kudos to the San Diego Air and Space Museum for posting all of those photos online for the public to see. So if you get a chance, definitely, I highly encourage you to visit their page on Flickr. And I'll go ahead and add the web address on our description so you could visit that and take a look at, because most of those photos Oscar himself took. And, even while flying in the air, Oscar would take these photos many times, and you could see where he's actually taken a photo of the entire island of Aishima where they were based at and things like that. So highly encourage you to take a look at that if you get a chance. And of course, if you're ever in the San Diego area, visit that very, very nice museum. It's the San Diego Air and Space Museum. So highly recommend it. Oscar continued to serve after World War II with the new United States Air Force. Many of you are aware that there was no longer a United States Army Air Corp after World War II. It became what we call today the United States Air Force. And he served until 1950. And with the start of the Korean War, Oscar was recalled to duty. So he would end up retiring as a major and a veteran of both World War II and the Korean War. Now, his oldest son, Ken, was serving in the US Army in Vietnam. His youngest son, Chris Perdomo, was also in the Army and training as a gunner in a Huey gunship. Their father, Oscar, was a huge influence on both Ken and Chris. With older brother Ken already in country in Vietnam, Chris didn't have to go to Vietnam. But when you have a father who was the last ace in a day of World War II and big brother Ken is serving in Vietnam, no one was able to talk Chris out of doing his part to serve his country. So Chris Perdomo volunteers for Vietnam. So Chris was serving with the 191st Assault Helicopter Company. On May 9th, 1970, the 191st was flying ground support for South Vietnamese Army Unit, about 60 miles south of Saigon. Warrant Officer Terry L. Henry from Clarion, Pennsylvania, was piloting one of the gunships, and Chris Perdomo was the gunner aboard that aircraft, the helicopter. The gunship was taking fire and shot down. As members of the 191st flew over the crash site, they saw the gunship on the ground and exploded. Chris Perdomo, the youngest son of Oscar Perdomo, was tragically killed in action in Vietnam. Chris's death also became a tragic end to Oscar Francis Perdomo, who never really recovered from his son's death. Oscar fell into a deep depression and at times turned to alcohol to soften the pain. America's last ace in a day of World War II, passed away on March 2nd, 1976. His ashes were scattered at sea. Oscar's story is a tragic end for a man that overcame many obstacles to fulfill a dream of flying an aircraft at top speed. While serving in the US Air Force in the 1950s, Oscar was given a certificate for exceeding the speed of sound in an F-86 Sabre jet. While he was fulfilling his dream, he was also etching his name in U.S. military history. I came across Oscar's story reading an article that mentioned just 2 sentences on him becoming an ace. For a historian of World War II, I had never heard of Lieutenant Perdomo's story. And after reading those 2 sentences, I really craved to know more about this real American hero who was of Mexican-American descent. As a genealogy buff, I had used genealogy to connect with families of the men that served with my cousin in World War II that I wrote about in my book. So I started Oscar's genealogy and found his son Ken. Ken was very helpful for me to be able to tell his story and giving me insight on the man who would become America's last American ace in a day of World War II. The commemorative Air Force Georgia Air Base is restoring a P-47 Thunderbolt and restoring it as Lieutenant Oscar Perdomo's Little Meaty's meat chopper. The aircraft that was originally sold to Nicaragua, and in 1963 an American bought the historic aircraft to be able to one day restore it. So CAF Georgia Air Base has a YouTube channel, and they post updates on the restoration. And kudos to CAF Georgia Air Base for honoring Lieutenant Oscar Perdomo in this manner. I subscribe to their YouTube channel because I don't want to miss any of the updates on this restoration that they're doing on a P-47 and turning it into basically a replica of Lieutenant Oscar Perdomo's P-47 during World War II. So 2 sentences in an article I read sent me on a journey to discover more about this heroic and inspirational man. He became an officer in the US Army Air Corp when it was unheard of for a Mexican-American of his time. Not only did he overcome obstacles to live out his dream of flying, he excelled at it. And he was a leader of an element group on a mission in the last days of the war. His historic action earned him several awards, including the Distinguished Service Cross. It was really heartbreaking to hear how his story ended with the tragic death of his son Chris in Vietnam. Lieutenant Perdomo's story is one of thousands of stories of Latinos who served this nation. 500,000 Latinos served in World War II. His story should be taught in schools. When I was growing up, I was never taught in school the Latino contributions in World War II. It's important that we bring these stories out from the shadows of history and really place them front and center. The Perdomo family's sacrifice to this nation should be honored and celebrated. Latino history is American history. And if you're into airplane models, there is a model that is out there. It's pretty easy to find of Lieutenant Oscar Perdomo's P-47 Thunderbolt. So if you're into airplane models and are looking to do a new one, there you go. There's a Lieutenant Oscar Perdomo airplane model that you can get. I have the model. I have not built it yet. I'm really looking for a larger scale model of the actual P-47. So I'm hoping to one day find a larger scale of the actual model to build. We hope you enjoyed this story on Lieutenant Oscar Perdomo, the last American ace in a day of World War II. Next, on Patriots from the Barrio. Sergeant Ramon Gutierrez, captured twice by the German army, escaping both times, making it back across Allied lines. He would become one of only a few Americans to be decorated for valor on the battlefield by the Soviet Union during World War II.